looks very much like a dictatorship, because that's pretty much what it is. They talk about establishing a curfew for your protection, for the citizens. They're presenting opportunities for the leaders to ally with them. They're completely taking over. I was like, oh my gosh, did I nail this? Hey, Star Wars fans, I'm Exactly One Sasquatch, and today we are going to go over Season 1, Episode 10 of The Bad Batch. And I think it'd be fun if I try to predict what's going to happen next. I'm going to try to talk about the things that I think were good writing, work well in the story, what don't, things I like, things I didn't like, things I want to see coming up, and what it might lead to in the future. By the way, this video is sponsored by the like button. It really helps out the channel a bunch, and it lets me know if you like this type of content. Also, subscribe if you want to see more of this type of content. I'm trying to come out with videos as often as possible. The last time on The Bad Batch, you had Omega using her creativity. She got out of the grips of Cad Bane and temporarily got away from him on the planet of Borovio, which is where Cad Bane was going to be meeting up with the Kaminoans to exchange Omega for unmarked credits. As Omega escaped, Cad Bane reacquired her. Fennec showed up, engaged Cad Bane, and then you found out at the end that Fennec is employed specifically by Nala Se with the intention of keeping Omega safe instead of trying to retrieve her, which is what Lama Su hired Cad Bane to do, to get her, retrieve her genetic material, and then terminate her. We learned from Tech that he analyzed Omega's DNA and found that she is pure first generation DNA. So she's supposedly or apparently a direct clone of Jango Fett, unaltered, no growth acceleration, no modified behavior, anything like that. And they mentioned there was only one other clone like that, codenamed Alpha, later named Boba. So obviously we know Boba Fett was the other one, because that's the one that we knew of. Interestingly, why were two copies made? Why one Alpha, one Omega? Did Jango want a daughter and a son? You know, they're essentially twins now. It seems like Omega is probably a couple years younger than Boba, because I think at this period of time Boba's about 14 or 15 and Omega looks to be about 12, so 2-3 years difference would be my guess. We still don't know if that's entirely true, that that's all there is to Omega. It's just that she's pure genetic replication of Jango Fett. I think there's more. Omega stumbles upon this inner room with these what seem to be very old tanks of clones clearly worked on by the Kaminoans. We saw what looked like to be a Celestin on the inside of one of those tanks that Omega was looking at. The tank that fell over onto Fennec and broke all over her appeared to be some form of Kaminoan. I had heard that what the Kaminoans went through as a society before we ever see them in Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, is that they once lived on a planet that looked very different, that eventually went through an ice age, and when all the ice melted, it ended up flooding the planet, and that's what we saw Kamino looks like today on Tipoca City. And it turns out that the way that the Kaminoans survived this, instead of like how a regular species would die off, except for certain of that species that would have traits that would allow them to survive in this new environment, like that's normal evolution. Kaminoans are very smart, and they worked on cloning and trying to modify themselves to better survive this type of environment. So that's what they are. They use their intelligence and their cloning ability to adapt and survive. Fennec successfully gets Omega away from Cad Bane, gets picked up by the Bad Batch, and she shows being intensely afraid of eventually being wound up in a test tube, and asks Hunter to promise that she never will wind up back on Kamino. I think she will wind up back on Kamino. And we're going to see what happens from here. You know, I was predicting maybe, is Sid going to double cross them when she's presented an opportunity by Cad Bane to supply Cad Bane with Omega and therefore get paid a lot of money and pay off the debt that the Bad Batch owe Sid? If the Bad Batch were to completely go off the grid in spite of Sid's wishes, that wouldn't play well, because you don't want a criminal underworld mob boss to be on your bad side, you know? So I was going to wonder how all that would work out. Was Cad Bane going to track down Omega? What the heck is going to happen with Crosshair and his injuries? You know, I was predicting that he would become less useful to the Empire, and then that would be more motivation that, one, he wouldn't have accomplished his goals, which would be more ammunition for Admiral Rampart to say, hey, look, clones don't get it done, we got to switch to cryptid soldiers. And then also he's injured, and you clearly saw that one of his eyes was patched over, and obviously Crosshair's eyes are very important to him, so if he has permanent injuries, that would be a problem for him. And yeah, those are generally my predictions. I was thinking Boba Fett's going to pop in somewhere. I was thinking maybe are the Bad Batch going to go after and try to hunt down Boba Fett, because that would be able to supply the Kaminoans with another source of first generation DNA, and then that would keep Omega safe. Is Boba Fett going to end up meeting up with Omega and training her? Is Omega going to end up being a Omega Fett, you know, or like being like a bounty hunter, or is there's something very different about her, etc., etc., etc. So without further ado, let's hop straight into it, you know? So immediately we hop hop into the planet of Raxus, which we saw in Heroes on Both Sides in the Clone Wars, which was the capital of the Separatist government. We immediately see what the Empire's occupation on unwilling planets look like. It looks very much like a dictatorship, because that's pretty much what it is. This leader here talks about establishing a curfew for your protection, for the citizens. They're presenting opportunities for the leaders to ally with them, but then they're arresting them if they don't comply. They're completely taking over. This is obviously brought from real things that happen across the history of the world and with society. And this harkens all the way back to the age-old adage and dichotomy between freedom and security. He's presenting it as this is security for you guys, for the safety of you people. We're establishing a curfew, but really what they're doing is seizing more power and control over the people. I think it was creative and smart by the writers to choose the capital of the Separatist government to show how different worlds would perceive the establishment of the Empire over their territory, you know? The Separatists had a problem with the way that the Democratic Republic was running things. And now you have an authoritarian empire that's trying to take over. They're not going to take kindly to that at all. Exactly what this show is trying to do is show the empire's footprint on all these different worlds. Like we saw on the world that Cut LaQuaine was on, the planet of Seleucami, how that planet was perceiving the Imperial occupation. They were cheering and incredibly happy because they were perceiving them as victorious in the Clone Wars. You know, that's what they were celebrating over, is that the Republic's victory over the Clone Wars and therefore establishment of the Empire. You can see how one society and one world could perceive the exact same types of events. And I think it was really smart of the writers to, one, show how different civilizations and different societies on different worlds, or you could say different countries like in real life, would perceive the same types of events. One being incredibly happy and not yet seeing the tyranny that'll develop from this galactic empire, and the other seeing this as a attack on their freedom and their rights and their independence, you know? It was really cool and I think creative of the writers to do something like that. Avi Singh ends up being a good leader and speaking out against the improper occupation of the Empire in their world, trying to push against dictatorship. There's so many real life things that appear in here. Well, I like the nice touch that this is the Empire, but the technology at the time also still is that of the Republic. These were walkers that the Republic used. I can't remember the name of them. ATTE. They're doing a good job, these writers and visual designers, of showing the slow progression from the Republic to the Empire, because you could tell that these soldiers are all clone troopers and they have like structurally the clone trooper design, but it's been wiped of all the different color schemes that were around during the Clone Wars, because you had like the 501st Legion, all the differences in colors that you would have. They're now being transitioned to white. It's a really cool, slow, progressive transition that really makes sense. Changes in design visually. The conversation that takes place between Hunter and Wrecker, where Hunter's like, the kid's been through enough, she needs a break, and then Wrecker says, she seems fine to me. I'm a little confused by it. I'm not sure what the writers meant by that, you know, because I would think Hunter's right. Did you see how distressed Omega was in the last episode? I would think giving her a break is a great idea. And then when Omega's upset that she's not being brought along on a mission, I feel like that wouldn't make sense. She's smart, and she seemed so afraid last episode of getting abducted back to Kamino. It seems like that fear wasn't enough to stop her from wanting to belong as part of the group, you know? Just kind of interesting to mention. I'm not sure what that says about her character, or if it's bad writing. I'm not sure. I do understand the sentiment of leaving her with Sid, but I literally thought this dialogue was lining it up for Sid to double cross the Bad Batch and sell off Omega. Hunter immediately just says to Sid, I don't exactly trust you either. And then Sid says, I have a financial incentive to keep her safe. Therefore, I'm most likely to keep her safe. I thought that was going to be a perfect teed up shot. We're reiterating that Sid only cares about money. So if an opportunity came to present itself where Sid can make way more money than she ever thought she would be able to by just giving Omega to a bounty hunter, I just thought that's exactly where this plot was going. I was like, oh my gosh, did I nail this? You know, but not what happened. Not what happened yet. I love that she calls him Bandana, because everyone feel like you see Hunter and you immediately see his bandana and you think of Rambo. I think this line of action is perfectly reasonable thus far. Good writing. I like that out of the whole Bad Batch, the one most apprehensive to working with Separatists Separatists is Echo. He was a reg. He was so invested in fighting against the Separatists throughout the Clone Wars. And then especially, he hates the Separatists for them capturing him and turning him into a human cyborg, you know, artificial intelligence, tactical predicting machine. And just the horrors that he's experienced. We saw in the first episode when he was hooked up to some of those machines and he kind of came to. You instantly saw him panic. I mean, the trauma that he has gone through at the hands of the Separatists. So it makes so much sense for Echo to be maximally hateful and distrusting of the Separatists. Hunter seems to be too, you know, some of the other Bad Batch, sure, but like Echo, it's really hit home for him. And I'm curious if this is going to come up sometime, you know, like by the end of the episode, we see Echo kind of aligning with the ruler of this planet, Avi Singh. He finally warms up to him a little bit, and it's probably where the title comes from, Common Ground, where you're like, we both now have a common enemy, which is the Empire. So I don't know if this is going to last long or if that was just a nice little self-contained character story just for this episode. I'm curious where Sid's character is going to go. I can't tell, obviously, if she's going to stay good or bad. You know, this conversation between her and Omega is interesting. I think maybe it just serves the point to show Omega's eventual motivation to improve her skills, because Sid points out to her, maybe if you weren't so helpless, they'd bring you along everywhere. And so that might stick with her, with Omega, because she doesn't want to get left behind anymore. So that might be some of her motivation to improve her skills and become a valuable member of the Bad Batch. Also, as we find out later, that Omega is particularly good with strategy. Obviously, we knew that Omega clearly is smart. She's very sharp. She's good at reading people's emotions. She's good at even manipulating a little bit, because she manipulated Toto. She's clever. She's very observant. And then now she's also especially good at strategy. It seems to fit her character as she's playing space chess here at Dejarik, because it's a strategy game that we obviously saw from A New Hope, where C-3PO, or maybe it was R2-D2 and Chewbacca were playing. So if Omega has these very good strategic skills, it'd be very interesting to see Omega being essentially the strategic leader, or just a straight up leader of the Bad Batch eventually, because she is the like king of queen, I guess, of tactical prowess and natural tactical ability. That'd be really cool if she becomes the young leader of the Bad Batch, shouting out commands and her developing the attack plans for each incoming battle and incoming mission, whatever they need. You know, it'd be kind of interesting, because it seems like right now Hunter is typically the person that gives out orders, but if Omega is to eventually become the one that is the tactical leader of the group, do we lose Hunter at some point? Like, what if they pull some crazy emotional Game of Thrones season 1 type thing, spoilers, where you lose Ned Stark immediately at the end of season 1? What if we lose Hunter at the end of this season, kind of like losing Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, or even losing Obi-Wan Kenobi at the end of The New Hope? Your wise leader that seems to have all the answers is suddenly gone. It'd be really interesting if something like that were to happen, and then Omega has to take over as this very young character, a lot like how Frodo had to do Lord of the Rings, and a lot like how Luke had to do. So could be a possibility. I feel like I doubt that'll happen. Maybe we eventually lose members of the Bad Batch along the way, but I'd be pretty surprised if we lose Hunter at the end of season 1. That'd be really interesting though. I like that throughout this episode they keep using the stun mode for their blasters, because obviously they see them still as their clone brothers that are just not in control of themselves. I like that. Makes a lot of sense. I don't know if they'll ever be able to help them. This little conversation that takes place between Hunter and Tech, talking about how Hunter accidentally says, hey, you take Omega and do this. I'm not sure what that conversation was meant to show. Like, obviously, it shows for Hunter that he's used to Omega being by his side and part of the missions. But besides that, it didn't really go anywhere else but that one conversation. So, I don't know. I love that it's also only these two that are ever hanging out in the bar. It's funny. I wonder if there's at all any kind of like emotional sort of bond that's getting formed between Omega and Sid. I'm gonna guess no. Or maybe it'll set up a bigger downfall when Sid eventually double crosses them, like I had originally predicted. Probably, maybe it won't come true, but you never know. It's interesting that this quickly into the Imperial occupation, they have this torture device that we see was around in The New Hope, which is like 19 years from now. They developed this pretty quickly, you know, it's kind of interesting. And then obviously this conversation that takes place between Tech and the Separatist leader, Avi Singh, where he says, you're gonna have to trust me. That's obviously Separatists and former Republic members or soldiers starting to align. Common ground. They have common ground. Showing the passage of at the times. I like that the Senator, Avi Singh, emotionally they show how he's torn because he does care greatly for his people, how he feels like he's abandoning them. But I love the point that the Bad Batch makes where they're like, you know, it's you can't help them if you're in an Imperial prison. You can live to fight another day. And then, of course, that comes from Echo, bringing this whole episode around, again, saying common ground, and you're showing the union of the former Republic with the Separatists against the Galactic Empire. But I'm also glad that they didn't rescue him this whole episode and then he just went back. Like, that would be so aggravating. I feel like that'd be bad writing. So overall, I think that this whole storyline with Omega shows, you know, a couple things. It shows, again, how useful she can be, how while she's vulnerable and a kid, she is coming into her own and has some abilities. I think maybe this shows a little bit of a bond between Sid and Omega. I'm not sure, though, because it seems at her core, Sid is still loyal to the coin. And I think that eventually, this might be some foreshadowing to Omega eventually running tactical missions for the Bad Batch. Either that or just running tactical missions in the Book of Boba Fett. Something like that if we see her in the Book of Boba Fett. So obviously overall this episode is much more of like a character building type of episode, which, you know, we're just coming down from very exciting episodes that we've seen. Things that seem to have like really, really big implications for the overall, not even just overall story of the Bad Batch, but the overall like Star Wars galaxy. And I think a lot of the predictions that I made from last episode and the ones I kind of re-mentioned again at the beginning of this video still can remain up for grabs because we didn't really get any like deconfirmation. The only thing that I think that maybe might not happen anymore is Sid double crossing the Bad Batch and giving away Omega because the debt is now repaid between the two of them. So I suppose that that's no longer going to be a story-driven plot point anymore. So those are my long-term predictions for next time. I think the story points of maybe Cad Bane tracking down Omega through Sid, I think it still could happen. I think nothing changed with the Crosshair storyline. I still think he'll be in bad standing with the Empire because of both his inability to get the job done and his injuries. I think what has to happen is Cad Bane has to track down the Bad Batch at some point. Maybe it doesn't happen through Sid, but maybe he employs the help of Boba Fett, and then Boba Fett finds out who Omega is and the Bad Batch, and then double crosses Cad Bane and either totally allies with the Bad Batch or helps them out of a jam, helps them out of a situation, helps them get away. But at some point, Omega's, I think, gonna get captured by Kaminoans and brought back. But yeah, I think that's about it. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, and see you again soon.